Hello, everybody. I hope that you guys are having an absolutely wonderful July. It's exciting to see projects getting done and being turned in. Earlier today, there were a couple things that I graded. It said, hey, we're missing a couple points on this because of these elements, and the people turned around almost immediately to fix those and turn them back in. So I really appreciate that. Pretty much everything is up to date right now. The only things that I have not finished grading are the the initial submissions for the conceptual art stuff, the ready-made object and the wrapped objects. And we're going to look at those today, the initial things that people have turned in. And a couple things that people have turned in have been like tile boxes, or I'm sorry, the texture and color boxes, as well as a couple other things like structure and skin, stuff like that. And I've made some comments that I hope are not cryptic. Again, I want to stress that nobody is graded as to whether or not their art is any good. Everybody is graded as well as possible in a direct relationship to what the assignment calls for. And I need people to understand that, because that's what we're looking at, what the assignment calls for. If you have any questions, please get a hold of me so we can go through and either do a FaceTime or a Teams meeting together. Oh, hey, Emily, you just got in.
Hi.
And as soon as we get that FaceTime or um, Teams meeting, then I'll go over whatever it is you have questions on, so we can clarify that. Emily, you're one of the people that I did that with, right? We did a Teams
Um,
meeting, FaceTime.
mhm.
Did they the difference between your initial submission and the submission after our discussion was night and day. It was
Cool.
entirely. I don't think anybody ever saw the initial one, which is
Oh
just
yeah,
fine.
I forgot to put both of them. I
Oh,
can
what's
go
that?
put it. I forgot to put both of the versions.
Well, I kind of would like people to see both versions, but
I
I'm really
will do
glad
a
that after our
project.
discussion, the second version was so much better. And it wasn't because it was better art, and that's something that I wanted to clarify. It's not better art, it just fits the assignment parameters. And that's the big thing that I think is important. And so again, if I'm being critical on something and explaining, well, this needs to be changed in these ways, this face of the texture cube, it needs to be different, the collages aren't really filling the parameters of the assignment. Again, it's all in relationship to the parameters of the assignment, and that's it. Well, Emily, did you have a good week this last week?
Yeah, I had a pretty good week. I got a lot of work done with this class
Well,
actually. The tiles
you
and
you turned in the first
the
two of the critiques, and we're going to look at those today, both of them today. And
hopefully.
I hope you don't get nervous about that. I think you did a really good job
Not.
on them.
Yay!
So I want people to see those. It's the first person who turned those in always gets extra credit just because they're the first and the bravest. I want everybody else to see those, and I will put links to them in today's attendance. And I want everybody to look at that so you know what to do. And this next week, whoever turns them in between now and Wednesday will also get extra credit. And then, so please get them turned in as soon as you can. We have enough stuff. But we're going to look at both of those. And then we're also going to look at one person did turn in the first of the ultimate revisitation of the carved foam sculpture. You put paper mache on it, and then you needed to apply texture and color. And we have one person who did that, and they did a phenomenal job. So we're going to look at that. And then also we're going to look at ready-made and wrap things. I have not looked at these submissions. So we're going to look at them for the first time as a class. And we're just going to talk through them. So, and I think that's pretty much what we're going to be doing today. see. Does that sound all right with you, Emily? And I'm just asking it as, you know, just for form, because I really don't care what your answer is. We're going to do it anyway.
Okay, I guess we could do that.
So we are going to, okay. All righty. Give me just a second here. I am just queuing up the 2 videos we want to watch. And then as soon as I do that, pardon me, as soon as I get that all queued up, then we are going to watch them. Now, as one of the assignments that you have at the end of the semester is to do a 3 to 5 minute video critiquing one of your own works, and then a 3 to 5 minute video critiquing somebody else's work. And you need to have all 4 of the steps of artistic critique. The first one is describe, the next is analyze, the third is interpret, and the fourth is evaluate. And you need all 4 of those in each of these videos, and they can't be any longer than 5 minutes. So unfortunately, Emily, her first video was 5 minutes and 1 second long, so she's failing this assignment. But I think that
Dang it, I knew it.
I'm kidding. It's that is going to be absolutely fine. I think the one person who did a presentation that was over 30 minutes long, this is about 4.5 years ago. That is the reason why I don't want people to do too long, because that it was 30 minutes is just way too long. So we are going to go ahead and watch this first video, and we're going to talk about it briefly, and then we're going to go on to the next one. And again, I am linking these in, I will be linking these in the attendance assignment, so you guys have those to watch whenever you need to. So let's see. Here we go. All right, here we go. All right, Emily, can you see this?
Yep, that's me.
All right, here we go.
Hi, I'm Emily Smith, and I'm going to be applying the tools of artistic critique on my own work, which I have here, so I am able to manipulate it for the video and show you all the sides of it.
The volume seems pretty low. Can you hear it? I don't know if it's my, because when I was listening to it earlier, there wasn't a problem. Can you hear it, Emily?
Yeah, I can hear it okay.
Okay, all right, good.
When I look at it, for the first tool of artistic critique in describing, I see a foam sculpture that looks more solid and refined on the front, versus very full of holes and kind of less solid, definitely more movement happening on the back, as it feels like it might even be in a state of escaping a carving from the front, where it has these swirly lines that kind of lead out as if it is going from one state to another. When I analyze the what the artist has done to achieve certain effects, I think that this dichotomy was probably intentional between the front appearing solid and the back appearing in the middle of moving. But I don't think that they're totally divorced from each other, because this spiral leads into the back shape as though it is grounding or supporting the movement happening on this portion of it. And although it is abstract, I can see various different shapes or creatures that could be in inspiration to the final form this took, as This part initially reads to me as like a bug's eyes, and these could be some sort of mouth, and this some sort of wings creature, or even a snail, where this is the shell and this is like the head coming out. It could also just read as lots of fingers or hands. And then as someone who loves the Nike of Samothrace, I can also see it as an abstraction of that piece where it's a solid form on a solid base, and yet there are these dynamic diagonal shapes coming out of the back, making it feel like it's on the verge of movement. As I interpret the meaning of this piece, I think that this is symbolic or intentional in some way to be symbolic, that the front and the back are in some sort of push and pull relationship where this is either grounding or even captivating, holding captive this part that seeks to move, as the spiral leads into it, as though it's trying to either pull it back in or push it out. This pace relates to me in my life as I see in it a sort of thought spiral in which, in somebody's psyche, they seek to try to escape their thought spiral that is holding them stuck in one state of being, and at the same time another part of them or parts of them is trying to get out of that thought spiral. And I was just diagnosed with ADHD, so I understand how relatable this sort of representation could be to being in two different states at once in your psyche, of wanting to stay in one spot and fixate on something for a long time and have it pull you in like these thought spirals, versus want to do lots of different things at once, or go different ways at once, like the back is this back is sort of reaching to do. I feel that for the evaluation, that the piece is mostly successful in creating that the dynamic of solid and movement, and communicates in a way that could be interpreted in various different ways depending on who is looking at it. And that's my analysis. And then for my artistic,
Okay. Now I'll give my take on this first. I don't think you need to title or introduce each of the sections, but sometimes that is really nice to do. And in this case, Emily chose to title each section. She said, "This is, I'm describing it now. Now we're analyzing, now we're interpreting." And I think that can really ground what you're doing and can help to really organize your thoughts as you're doing it. And as she was going through, I also noticed that there was no specific reference to any of the questions in any of the under any of the tools that we have on that sheet, on that page, but she was able to address each of those anyway. She didn't say, okay, how big is this? How long is it? What is it? What she answered the question without having to ask the question outright, and I really appreciated that as well. Everything flowed, everything went smoothly from one area to another. Another thing that I really appreciate is, this is probably the most difficult, is that Emily was able to divorce herself specifically from the fact that she was the creator of the object, and was able to talk about it stepping away. And I like that, particularly when talking about the ADHD diagnosis towards the end, and relating it to herself as if she was separate from the object. I thought that was well done. All right, Emily, what is your take on it? How did you think? you did?
I practiced once before I did this, and what I had in front of me was, besides the video of myself, the I had listed out the sections and then some of the questions. So that's why I was able to state each section, and then kind of I had already rehearsed my answers to the questions, so I didn't need to really read those out loud again or anything. And then I watched it back once, and I was like, yeah, seems good enough. So I think I did okay.
I think
And yeah,
that's great.
it was difficult to not look at it and just see all the things that I, as an artist, wanted to have done differently, and instead try to look at it as something that I didn't have a part in actually making, because that's what I initially wanted to start commenting on, was like, oh, in this part I wanted to do this, but it turned out like this, because that's not what you were looking for.
Well, this reminds me, I had a discussion last night with a friend of mine about this very same thing, talking about, when do you divorce yourself from the work, separate yourself from being the creator of it, and is it even possible? And one of the things that he pointed out was that when you are the creator, the moment that you're making it, you can see all the other options that you've refused to do. And he said, when you look at your most favorite poems, for example, and the poet themselves had a horrifically difficult time themselves with the poetry, because the first couple words, the first couple lines, they can do it, but all the rest of it, they're having just a terrible time, because there's all these other things that they could say, or there's all these other words that they could use, but they can't anymore. And just being aware of that, you have to step away and realize, this thing has a life of its own, and it is its own thing. And I thought, Emily, you did a really good job with that, because that is difficult. If you guys sucked as artists, you wouldn't have any of those issues. and you don't suck as artists. So you are going to be constantly second guessing yourself. And that is just a factor of being a good artist. But also, being a good artist means being able to separate the content of what you've done from all those other things that you could be doing. So yeah, I thought that was well done. Okay, so we're going to watch the next one. This is Emily's critique on somebody else's work.
Artistic critique of a peer's work, I'm going to be applying the tools of artistic critique.
Okay, again, can you hear this? Because on my computer, the sound is coming through a little fuzzy.
It seems okay to me so far.
Okay, good.
To this work right here. When I look at this work, I see a wire sculpture using at least two different colors of wire. The black wire obviously is the main frame, it appears, as well as a silver wire of what appears to be the same gauge as the black wire, and then perhaps even a third gauge of wire that is very thin and very tightly wound, particularly in details of this figure and some other little details, such as these parts I read as horns, and this part I read as a tail. Perhaps that thin gauge is also used here. On these parts I read as water lilies or flowers of some kind. When I look at this, the black line stands out as sort of the first read, and the silver and gold, or I'm not sure if it's gold or just very thin and appearing gold, wire appears on the second read. In the first read, I see some four-legged creature and some sort of base, and some sort of human figure with some sort of cloud bubble above them, which on my analysis of this piece, I interpret to be a person playing a flute or a musical instrument of some kind, and then this bubble above them being an abstract version or an abstract what's it called? Portrayal of the music notes being played. If I tried to guess, I'd say it's some sort of water buffalo, and these could be water lilies. And I'm very fascinated by the choices on the silver wire as I look on the details of the second read, especially the swirls and the cross hatching within the body make me want to study this even longer than if I had just read it with the black wire only. If I were to interpret what the artist is trying to say here, I would say they probably know some sort of folklore or story related to humans and nature coexisting and creating something beautiful, as they have done here with this piece of these wires completing each other and holding each other up with a human and a four-legged creature balancing in some sort of natural environment, with even this beautiful cloud balancing out the top of the work. I think if I were to evaluate the success of this work, that they did an amazing job of just making something beautiful and fascinating that I want to hear the artist talk more about, to see if there is some sort of story behind it, or even to just put my own story on it as I look at these little details of how long this must have taken. It feels like something that must have been important to them to complete beyond even the parameters of just this assignment that they did it for. And overall, I really admire this piece. And that is my evaluation of this piece.
All right, excellent. Okay, Emily, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I hope you don't mind. Pretend that it's somebody else's critique, but let me know what did you think about that critique? The critique itself, not the object that was being critiqued, but critique the critique.
I think that this critique used specific language other than just "I like this" or "I dislike this," but used words specific, such as the first read and the second read, and that in the interpretation came to more conclusions than were they're possible with just observation, so got a little deeper as the steps went on. So I think that's my evaluation of the evaluation.
That was something I really appreciated too. First read and second read, I thought it was good to talk about both of those because we do have an initial impact when we encounter a piece of art. And then we spend a little bit of time with it. There's always like a second chapter in our observation. So I thought that was good. And I liked how you pointed out the three different kinds of wire that were used. And as you got into interpretation, you were talking about, this looks like it should be a story. And I'd like to know what the story is now. And I thought that was really good too. So you weren't just talking about the object itself, but you're also talking about potential content, that the object could have had. And I thought that was well done. I think there are a couple of things that I wanted to point out for this process. These are really important. It is really important to be able to articulate your observations and your evaluation of somebody's work, of an object that you encounter. And I think that a couple things that I want to point out with this assignment is that Emily's 2 critiques are a really excellent length. Each of the 4 tools were addressed, and each of the 4 tools were addressed with, I wanted to say adequately, but I don't think that's a very good word because it sounds dismissive. I think each of the 4 tools were addressed the way they should be, with the right length of time. And 45 seconds on each one is great. And you spent just about a minute on each of them. Another thing that I wanted to point out is Emily mentioned that she did a dry run before filming it, where she kind of practiced a little bit. I think that's really important to give yourself some confidence when you do it. Another thing I wanted to mention is you don't have to be the voice yourself. Notice on the first one we saw, Emily was actually modeling the object herself, turning it around. You don't have to be on screen at all, which she demonstrated really well in the second one. We looked at the image that was taken off the computer. And even when you critique your own object, you can critique it from an image that you put as your submission. And that's totally fine. But I also want to point out that you can write the script, write the description out, and then have somebody else read it, or put it into an AI narrator program so that a completely different voice reads it. And that is totally fine. If you don't want your face and your voice to be recorded, that is completely, I don't care. That's totally fine. Have AI, have a friend, have somebody else be the voice for you. And as long as they are reading your words, it's fine. It's great. That will work just fine. Because the important thing is it's your critique. So I think both of these are really good examples of what a good critique will be. So let's see, I want to what I want to do now is look at image of texture and collage boxes, and we're just going to look at one, and we'll look at it for a bit. I want to look at an image of the final project that everybody's going to be moving towards. And then I want to look at the different submissions for the ready-made and the cocooned object, if that's all right. Well, whether or not it's all right, that's what we're going to do.
I guess.
All right. So we are going to look at, okay, texture and color chip. So do you have anything to add about the critiques?
I think that it was just really fun to do because I figured out more about the works I critiqued as I was thinking about the steps, like during the dry run that I did. So it was fun. Recommend
Was it
it.
easier or harder than you expected?
It was easier than I expected.
Okay, excellent. That is great. Good to hear. I'm glad you did it. I'm glad you did it well. I've done this before where the first critiques I couldn't show because they were not very well done. And so I just demonstrated again with random objects. And by the time we got to the second and third things that were being turned in, they were okay, and I could share those. But oh man, the first ones were pretty awful. That hasn't happened for a couple of years. And I think a big part of that is that when we see good examples, that's what we want to do as well. So nicely done. Okay, so I think for the most part, people have gotten a handle on this pretty well. I did get a couple of submissions that I don't think people look too closely at the examples that were shown and that were posted on the discussion. So I want to show this really quickly, and we'll just talk about this. Now we look at here. This is the color collage Notice that each of the faces has more than 6 pieces in the collage. And I mentioned last time you guys are artists, and that's kind of what I expect. And it looks to me that these were made with magazine scraps that were cut up. Is that true, Emily?
Yep, I cut up all the magazines in my house.
All
Just
right,
based on
that's excellent.
color.
It looks to me like this face is analogous. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
colors are right near each other. It looks to me like this is a triad,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks to me like this is a split complementary. Is that right?
Yep.
And I want to point out that there are definitely more than 6 pieces for each of these collages. The person who made these did not use just solid colors, because that's something that I mentioned as well, that you guys are artists. I expect you to be artists, and so I'm looking for more nuance. And a triad is 3 different colors, so that's something else to point out. So make sure that when you pick your complements that you talk about, I'm sorry, not the complements, that when you pick your color schemes, you actually stay with it. So analogous is going to have several different tones, and we can see that these are all hovering right around purple. We have some lilac, we have some indigo, we have stuff in between, we have a dark blue. These are all hovering right around there. For the triad, we have red, blue, and yellow. And you can see that this person used several different shades of yellow, several different shades of blue, several different shades of red. So that was really well done. And right here, the split complement, we can see here we have the principal color, which looks to me like it's going to be like an orange. And then the split complement, you're going to have green and indigo on either side of the purple, which I like. I think that turned out, or on either side of the blue. And I think that turned out well. And notice that we're doing strips, different kind of shades of those colors from the magazine, but they fit pretty well within the umbrella of those colors that are being used. And that's what I want to point out. I think this is a really good example of a collage. Then when we go over here, we look at the texture. There is color in the texture as well, but even though there's color in the texture, I want to point out that the principal driving this factor for the decision making is playing with the texture itself. We've got a bunch of beads. The beads are fun. We've got shells. We've got knickknacks and stuff like that. The texture overall here is what you would find in a sewing drawer. You know, and here we have strips of cardboard that are cut against the grain. So we have the corrugation on the edge of the cardboard. Those strips are glued down, and then beads are added to it to add another element of texture. Then here we have what almost looks like a piece of felt as a background, but the driving texture here are, it looks like silk flowers from like a craft store or Dollar Tree. And it makes for kind of a fun little thing where the intent is not to give you an outdoorsy scene, but to just glue down some flowers and stuff. And so I think all 3 of these textures, the individual textures themselves are kind of disconnected a little bit from the elements within the texture itself, but that's what gets it to work as a texture. So these are the kinds of things that we're looking for. Notice that at no point remember we talked like a week or 2 ago, we don't want to just wrap a piece of cardboard with aluminum foil and call that a texture. If you're going to use aluminum foil, do something interesting underneath it, like put some string down or something like that, so it becomes more than just a flat plane, because we're looking for texture. And I think that these work pretty well. Do you, without giving away who the artist is who made these, Emily, do you have any comments to make about putting the collage together? How long did it take you to make each of these collages, for example?
Well, I cut up the magazines for like 3 hours. So that was a good chunk because I was just looking for large patches of colors, and then I separated them into like a big pile of rainbow across my table. And then when the artist chose the different color relationships, I just pulled out each pile of colors from the big collage or the big mess I had made on the table already. Just pulled those colors toward me and then proceeded to cut them up even more and glue them on. So it's like 3 hours for cutting the whole magazine, and then it made each one take like 30 to 45 minutes, and it was very fun. I even found
That's the way to do it.
in one of
That,
the yellow portions, there's a strip, not on this one, but on the other side, there's a yellow portion that has a text. Because I realized that I had incidentally cut out my older sister's name because she is the editor of one of the BYU magazines, and her name was highlighted in yellow, so I had cut it out as a yellow portion, and I was like, okay, that's going in there. So that was fun, just to focus on the colors. I didn't even notice that it was her name.
No, and that's great. I mean, when you are starting to do a painting, I lay out my watercolors, I get them all ready to go, and then I draw from them, and that's exactly what you did. You created a palette and you drew from it, and I like that. And what I'm seeing is that same kind of thought process is pretty consistent among the people who are doing a successful job with the collages. Remember, a collage is separate pieces of paper cut out and then put together. So great work on that. And am I right in that this was just junk found in a sewing drawer for this texture?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I don't sew, but I do a lot of little crafts with beads and buttons and seashells. So that's what I just collected. Was I just dumped it out and picked out interesting pieces. That was
Right.
fun.
That's excellent. I think that's great. I wanted to go through and I stopped sharing for just a bit because I'm going to go through and find another good example or two. Okay. So we're gonna look at this one really quick. I want you to look at this texture is really good example of texture. So I love the fact that this person put so many things from their walks onto this texture. These almost look like olive berries on the branch or mistletoe or something like that. And that kind of thing is really fun. Or the blue and gray kind of, or the different shades of blue right here. I think this is a good example of collage on that one. And one of the examples that I really liked, let's see if I can find it really quick here. I'm going to show one more example. All right. And I want you to look at at this texture example. I think they did a really nice job. Where, I mean, look at the layers on this texture right here that they've done. And this one, they spray painted the whole thing the same color. So the thing that really comes out is the texture. So I think that's a really good example of the texture cube. So, and there's plenty of other examples, good examples too, but go through the discussion for that assignment and look for good examples of that kind of thing. Just the depth of texture. Several people spray painted the whole cube, and that really made the textures come out when it's all spray painted the same color. And there were several people that did just really nice work on the collages. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is show a really good example of the final object, the final thing you're doing with this foam carving. So I'm going to share this as well. All right, so we've got both sides of this, and you can't really see the shape of the carving at all. Can you see this object, Emily?
Yeah, I can.
And what I like about this, I talked to this artist a couple times back and forth about this a little bit. They picked a color scheme, and instead of just painting it with that color scheme, they found elements of texture that fit that color scheme and then applied that directly to the sculpture and just applied it out the wazoo. So we have flowers with several different colors. We have ribbons that are textured. We have other elements that almost look like dragon scale kind of things. We have different things that are poked directly in to the sculpture or glued directly on, but you can't see any of the foam carving. You can't see the paper mache. They're using it as the canvas to apply the color and texture to. And when this person did some, they went back and revisited more and revisited it again until the whole thing is just gone because of all the textural quality and explosion of color on top of it. And can you see, Emily, that the color is not at all random. There is a very definite color scheme that they're working with and that they're consistent with. And it makes it feel like it's its own thing. Do you get that impression?
Yeah, totally.
Now, I think that this object would look totally awesome 6 feet tall. It would look amazing. Even 3 feet tall on a plinth in the middle of campus, this would look pretty
Yes.
spectacular. But I love having this be the first example because they did a really solid job with this. And their photography is such that the object itself stands out. There's nothing that's confusing or detracting. So I think they did a good job with the photography as well. So excellent example. And now I stopped sharing that, but what other things did you notice when we look at that, or things that you take away from it?
It looked like they have wrapped the base, the styrofoam base, in some kind of cloth, and it, I think,
Yeah,
makes it really matches the energy of the rest of the piece. So I'm glad they did that.
yeah, and it doesn't detract from it at all either.
Hmm.
I see that turned out really well. Now we are going to look at an example of a ready-made. Let's see, and I'm wondering. Let's see how many there are. Okay, there's a few ready-mades. So we're going to look at a couple examples and talk about each one. And I think we may have like 3 or 4 examples, something like that. But what I have is the thing that was shared on the discussion board. So we have both the object itself and the statement. And we're gonna look at both of these. So we're gonna look at the object as well as the statement. Okay. All right. And this we're shifting forward, this or shifting back. What we just saw was an excellent example of the final assignment. And we're taking a step back and looking at the contemporary processes where we're talking about ready-mades and cocooning. So if anybody's confused, that's we're looking at ready-mades now. Okay, so I'm looking for a title. The title is complete. And this is the ready-made object. So we could tell right away what is the ready-made that they used.
It's a box of puzzle pieces.
Yeah, it's a jigsaw puzzle box. Exactly. And that's all it is. What are the elements that they did to make this photo kind of stand out? I think they used a sheet for the infinity screen, a sheet of paper or a really nicely ironed sheet, and that draws all the attention to this itself. How did they actually pose the puzzle?
It's not what I would call complete. Falling into pieces.
Yeah, it's a dynamic presentation. They took off the lid, they set it up diagonally leaning against the infinity screen in the background and spread the puzzle pieces out. So it looks like it's getting ready to be dumped on the table. It's in that process. And I think that this is really an excellent photo. I think they did a great job with the photo. Now, let's see, the title is complete. I want to look through what they wrote. So it's a 1,000-piece puzzle that was put away, and they talk about the origin of the piece. You know why they chose it, and then for turning it into its own artwork, this person talks about beginning to dump the pieces out, setting it up, and everything like that, and even editing the image so that there's a little bit more contrast to make it look more interesting and refined. I really like that. So it shows that they really worked at making an image that is kind of its own thing, or its own presentation of the object, because it is a pretty mundane object. It is a pretty ordinary object. And she talks about, or this artist talks about, they made no alterations to the puzzle itself. All the alterations that were made are in just how it was displayed. And complete refers to the fact that all the pieces were there. They did finish putting the puzzle together at one point, and it's a commentary on potential more than anything else. And I really like that. By the artwork, they're intentionally asking you to think about what it is, and they're intentionally making the image itself an interesting photo. And I think that turned out really well. So I think this is a really good example of what the assignment is. Did they spend a lot of time on the object itself? Well, no, it's just the object. Where is all the time being spent to turn this into an art piece?
You asking me?
Yes.
In thinking about it. And the photography skills.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about it and providing a new context for us as viewers and presenting that context in the photo. So yeah, excellent. Now, one thing I want to point out is Man Ray did photos like this, where you would take an object and just present it completely out of context. And that's what this person is doing. I mean, they're setting this up, they're posing it specifically. You know, if this is in a catalog, it's not going to look like this, you know, as a catalog photo. This is very specifically a different kind of dynamic photo. And so I think this is, the photo itself is nicely done. And so, and the three paragraphs, it talks about this as a scalp massager, and just, you know, talk about what it's used for ordinarily. And then the new title is False Bloom. And I like that because when you look at this, it's a pretty good idea that, I mean, there's a pretty good chance that you recognize this as a scalp massager, but giving it the title False Bloom, for most people, is going to push them in completely different cognitive direction than what we identify it as. And I think that's an excellent title. And putting it so that it's mounted on the handle as if the handle is a stem, they did a really nice job. And then paying attention to where the shadows are. And I like this where they talk about it, they recontextualized it as a wire sculpture. And I think by holding it in a different position and then giving it a dynamically different title, I think it forces us as viewers to come at this, to create a relationship with this object in a completely different way than we normally would. I think, again, this I think is another really good example. And I want to look at this. Did we look at this last week, Emily?
I don't think so.
I don't think we did. Okay, so look at this image, just the image itself. The background is kind of a spotty gray. It has its own kind of texture. It almost looks like a painting background. And we have these two sticks right here that look parallel. And with the light coming from an angle, we can see that they're not parallel. Well, they're parallel from one view, but from another one, we see the shadows intersecting each other. I think this photo by itself should be printed large just as its own composition. It's a really beautiful image just by itself. And then Dow talks about this. Chopsticks are ubiquitous. I mean, they are. Dow talks specifically about this in Asian food culture. For me, in my family, I grew up using chopsticks all the time, and I know a lot of other families that don't identify as Asian also use chopsticks growing up. You know, they're part of just eating. They're so common and ordinary. It's ridiculous that you would think of them as anything else. And so she's taking one. Dow has taken ones that look like they have been heavily used as well, but they're completely ordinary things. And then by placing them in this way, it transforms these completely ordinary throwaway items that are utterly disposable and presenting it in a completely dynamic way. And it's astonishing to me how beautiful this image is in relationship to how utterly ordinary the chopsticks are. and I love how Dow describes setting up the photo, what it means, you know, why the title. And I really enjoy reading about this because it does create a beautiful image from utterly ordinary stuff. You know, things that are on the bottom of my flatware drawer at home. You know, just stuff that is utterly throwaway, but you being used by Dow to make something that is an image that really, with the title, starts making you think all sorts of different things. What do you think about this object as well, or about this art piece as well, Emily? What are your responses to it?
I think that it's a very deceptively simple looking design to have two horizontal
not sorry, they're not horizontal, but they're parallel lines, but that their shadows show something different than what it appears on the surface. And there's a lot to be said about that. And I think that I'm not surprised that this is Dow's, because I don't think she's done anything that I haven't really liked in this class and the other class I have with her. I'm always looking for what she has submitted. She's really good at setting things up and thinking about them.
Well, and I think that these three examples that I've shown are examples from people that really thought through the assignment, I think. And I love having those examples to show everybody, because they really show you what I'm hoping people get from this assignment. You know, we talked about the allegory of the cave, what the world of the ideal, you know, and where reality lies, where we can also talk about the meaning of where the art lies. You know, we spoke about that. Is the meaning what the artist intended? Is intention completely irrelevant, or is it somewhere in between? And these three examples are all make me excited, because I think they really demonstrate the communication power that is latent in artwork, that is important to consider, because when we're talking about conceptual work, we're talking about you're sculpting people's imaginations. And all artwork, I think, as we approach it using those 4 tools of artistic critique, and we approach the artwork, you know, as a viewer, we approach the artwork very intentionally, which is what critical means. Critical does not mean harsh or nasty. It means with intention. We generate or support an environment of communication. Now, we're probably not going to interact with most of these artists directly, and that's almost immaterial. What we are interacting with is when we see the art, we immediately, as we go through those steps of artistic critique, we create an avatar of the artist inside of our own imaginations. And we generate a situation where we are not maybe communicating with the artist directly themselves, but we are very much having a conversation with that imaginary presence of the artist. And it's exciting to me when I see work that you guys create that is specifically designed as something that can be very quickly becoming a conversation, you know, with somebody. And I think that's been fantastic. So anyways, I think that those 3 are just excellent examples of that kind of thing that we're looking for with the ready-made object. And Emily, just your take on that. Can you see how much of a difference between when you recognize the object and you know what it is, and then how these people presented it, how it's really become something different?
Totally.
You've probably never heard of somebody called Ibn Khaldun, have you?
Doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, he was a 13th century Muslim philosopher, one of my very favorite people. He is the very godfather of a lot of the soft sciences, you know, things like sociology and museology, a lot of the soft sciences that depend on contextualization. And he wrote a lot about how the object itself is fundamentally transformed depending on our engagement with it and its presentation. One of the examples he used is, and we're talking 13th century. So this is right at the middle of the Crusades, you know, to give you an example of time. But he said, if you take an object and you see it in somebody's home, it means something specific to that home and that family that's using it. And then if you see that same thing several years later in a museum on display with a label and a date as to when it was used, it's going to mean something very different. And have you gone to a museum where you've seen like a pair of children's shoes or like a 300-year-old doll? And have you ever had that experience?
Yeah, I think so.
And if you have had that experience, can you imagine what it was like playing with the doll as a kid or wearing the shoes as a child, and just how different that object might have meant to the person using it, and what it means now sitting on a little white slab in front of you in the museum? Can you kind of imagine what that difference of meaning?
Totally. Yeah, it reminds me of the 1 and 3 chairs. How I think I can't remember if it's a video about it that you linked to us or something I read, but um somebody talking about 1 and 3 chairs said that it stops being art and starts being a chair. If somebody old is like walking through the museum and sees a chair and comes and sits in it, then it's not the art piece anymore. Now it's actually a chair again.
Yeah. Yeah,
And that's probably
I
how
love
those
that.
people felt about their shoes and their toys. They're like, why would you put this in the museum? Like, that's just my shoe. That's just my toy.
Yeah, and there's almost like a membrane of transformation that you kind of have to push through when it shifts from the thing that you use, like sitting in the chair, to the thing on display. That's my older sister, Kathy. She was Shoshone, and she made beaded moccasins for children. As presents from their parents, they would have her make these beautiful little baby moccasins that were just incredibly intricately beaded because she was a traditional Shoshone beater. And I I remember seeing some of the traditional patterns that she would use and make these beautiful little baby shoes that I thought were just the most gorgeous presents for a new family, for new parents. And then to go to the Yakima Nation Museum in southeastern Washington State, where they have on display 150, 180-year-old beaded moccasins made by somebody who is no longer even a presence in anybody's living memory. So these people have been dead for generations, and then to see these artifacts on display, and then start thinking also, at one point, these were worn by a beautiful little baby girl who laughed and cried and played with her brothers and sisters 180 years ago. And it's really interesting to navigate the shifting of meaning, the shifting of context. And that's one of the reasons why I get excited when you guys are thinking through how to recontextualize Readymades. I love seeing that shift of thought and meaning and context in what you guys do. So it just gets me excited. I just enjoy that. Anyway, I don't know if you can tell that it makes me excited. So what I want to do now is look at a couple examples of cocooned or wrapped objects. And I think, I don't know, this is the first time looking through these. So I want to look at each one and kind of talk about them. And some of these I think are, I don't know how many of them have been turned in, but I think that they're really interesting. And the first example I think was really well thought out. So we're gonna, all right, here we go. Looking at this, there's very little context of what the original object was, which I appreciate. Remember, one of the parameters of this assignment is is to wrap it in such a way that it fundamentally transforms the silhouette of the original object. And the artist also wrote an essay about, wrote the background behind it, so we can reflect on that as well. But I want to talk a little, something about this wrapped object, this cocooned object. Looking at this, is there any way of knowing what is actually in there? Can you tell what it is originally?
I feel like I can see a little bit of the base on the bottom, just barely. So I'm guessing like a lamp, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's just enough to hint that there is something underneath, and I love that. This person did a really good job of that. Remember, Jean-Claude and Christo, a lot of the times the wrapping would give you a pretty good idea, indication of what's underneath. But when they wrapped human models, when they wrapped some of the other things, there was just stuff poking out just to the point where you could tell this is an object that is not what you expect. You know, it is wrapped up and engages the monkey mind. It engages the curiosity. Some of the things that I think are really interesting about this is notice the use of green ribbon right here. And they didn't use the ribbon again, but they used a green string, which ties the color in. The person used complementary colors. They used red up here and green down here. And the red up here, it's kind of a shiny ribbon or tape that was used so that they contrast texturally with the ribbon down here. And they used a green string to tie the two elements together. Green string over the red, and it's the same color to tie it right here. There are so many things that make this an object that is really nice to look at just by itself. I think that excellent thought going into this. Looks like they wrapped some green ribbon around this a little bit before they wrapped it with red, but there's elements where texturally it kind of echoes each other and talks to each other. Color-wise, again, it ties it together. There is a certain roundness down here that leads into almost like a cone shape that kind of mimics the roundness up here. You have these horizontal and vertical lines that kind of stabilize the roundness and again echo the very strong texture that's going on here. So I think there's a lot of thought. This person didn't just wrap it, they put a lot of thought into how they wrapped it. And I think that's what makes this successful. And then when they talked about it, find out this is a globe, and let's see, we're going to share this tab. Talking about it, they wrote 3 paragraphs where they kind of describe and explain what's going on. And this is the concept behind it. This is what they did. And for some people, the concept may turn out a little bit different or be changed as you are working on the wrapping, and that's fine. But here Dow talks about what the original object is, globe and a small airplane. And the object talks, there's some certain meanings given to the object that was wrapped. And then it talks about what are the colors, what do the colors mean? And then there is a layer of fabric wrapped around the globe, and then ribbon was used, and it was just very careful in layers to make it feel like the globe is spinning, doing different things to kind of use the color and the texture that is being built up to kind of echo or underline or respond to the ideas that are present in the object that is being wrapped. So some really good thought about that. And then just discussing a little bit about the interaction, what it means for the whole thing altogether. And I think that this is going to be added to the discussion as well, so you can see all that together. And I think that this is a really good example of what this assignment can be, because the artist was really thinking it through and making it as making the wrapped object as a beautiful three-dimensional object itself, but also providing meaning to the different layers and stuff. And this I think is really a good example too, because whether or not you read the paragraphs that Dow wrote doesn't make any difference to whether or not you can appreciate this. The photo is beautiful. The object itself is really nicely done. And whether or not you know what the artist's intention is almost immaterial, because you can tell that it is intentionally made. There is intention to it. And you can, after reading that, go back and look at this, and you can see, oh yeah, I can see where Dow is talking about this. I can see what they might mean when they're doing these things. I can see where these different textures come in. And that's really good too. But just by itself, there's enough going on that you can tell it's done on purpose, and you can add layers of meaning to it yourself as well. And I think that's I think that makes this a really good example for a successful completion of this assignment. When if you read that paragraph at all, Emily, does that add to your appreciation of the work?
Oh yes, definitely.
Can you appreciate the work without the paragraphs?
Yeah, either way. I mean, there's definitely more mystery to it without the background, but I like understanding where the artist was coming from as well for works like this. So I think it looks really I like having that meaning too.
Well, it's Clement Greenberg talked a lot about. It almost seemed like he was dismissive if artists had to explain what they were doing, and I agree to a certain extent to that. I don't think we should ever have to explain what we're doing. I think we shouldn't have to justify or validate the work that we present by explaining it. But on the other hand, if I think I don't remember if it was chapter 7, 9, or 11, where it talks about the ways of involving your viewers. And one of the ways is adding narrative, adding some additional commentary. And I think that that's kind of fun, because for some of us, we like getting that little bit of a window into the artist's head. And I think it shouldn't validate your work. It shouldn't be necessary to appreciate your work, but it is really nice. It should be nice to have that, because then it does satisfy a little bit of the monkey mind. And I think it can add depth and appreciation to the work that we're presented with. So I think it's a good idea sometimes to do that. I don't think it's a good idea to feel like you need to validate your work, because all of you guys are strong enough in your work that you shouldn't have to feel like you need to validate it. But it is nice to have just some explanatory paragraphs to give added richness and added depth to what you're presenting. And I think that can work out really well a lot of the times. What are your thoughts, Emily, about this?
I think that I liked that you said, you brought up that quote that's, I don't know who said, but that artists shouldn't have to explain what they're doing, but and then conversed upon it, because it made me think, yeah, but sometimes it's fun to talk about what you did, and it's fun for the artist, like even if they don't, if it's not necessary, sometimes it is
Right.
beneficial to the artist themselves to explore their like what motivated them creatively without words, to put it into words, because that part can be therapeutic for them and insightful for the viewer as well.
Yeah, and it was Clement Greenberg that I was
Okay.
talking about. But yeah, and there are artists that I've encountered whose work is pretty cool, but then when they talk about it, suddenly I'm no longer interested at all in what I'm seeing. because if they had just allowed me to layer my own meaning, my own interaction onto whatever the object is, I would have had a lot more fun than to find out that this person is just a non-thinker. And I've had that experience sometimes, and it's which is really sad. But most of the time when I'm engaging with people, and this I find I really enjoy this with students at UVU and the faculty at UVU, like Chris Thornock. I really love talking to him. And uh, several other, I mean, all the faculty are fun to talk to. But when you start hearing what their rationale is behind what they're doing, how they developed the different imagery that they're working with, why they made the choices that they did, it becomes, like Emily said, it becomes fascinating. It becomes another layer that of potential meaning that we can appreciate. It's guy did Pope Innocent Screaming. What's his name? He was a painter, Francis Bacon, as a painter. He was an expressionist that a lot of his work, I think, is emotionally engaging. And then I lost a lot of interest in his paintings when I saw how he interacted with people. He was so dismissive and so nonchalantly entitled when people would ask him to talk about his work that it was really difficult to separate that elitist behavior from his paintings. And I found it very difficult to enjoy his work after that. And then I counter that with Basquiat's paintings and the stuff that he was doing, and then finding out his excited engagement with the materials that he worked with, I thought was exciting. Or Keith Harrington is another person who would just get so excited doing his paintings that it was just fun to watch. Or Yinke Shonobara is another person that I just love, where you hear him talk about his work and you get just excited to see the new stuff that he comes up with because it's so engaging and fun. Or Nick Cave is another one where he presents his own stuff. Or El Anatsui, or one of my favorite people in the whole wide world is Betty Saar. And when you look at her sculptures, they're fun to look at. And then when you hear her talk about her work, you realize, oh, she's just enjoying this. It's a whole different level of engagement because you get involved in just the layer of absolute fun that the artist has. And then uh, Kara Walker, I love her work, and when she talks about her work, it makes my heart ache because of how all the different layers of thought and meaning that she puts into it, and you realize that this is a conversation that must be had with each of her things that she completes. It's a conversation that must be had, and you come away feeling like somebody peeled a giant scab off your back. It hurts, and you're grateful. You feel transformed, and I love that kind of interaction. So yeah, but be cautious, I think, when you engage with other artists because sometimes every once in a while there is that person that talks about their work to you and you're thinking, oh really, why don't I like this anymore? So just be careful. But that's
Fair.
what's that?
I said that's fair.
Yeah. No, and there are. I'm going to shift gears back to grading and the process of grading. Um, uh, well, before I do that, any last comments or questions about any of the stuff we looked at today, Emily?
Um, I don't think so, but I might be texting you again about my wrapped thing. Like I texted
Okay.
you on Sunday to ask you questions about um the ready made, because this, although I think that this version of art the conceptual art is very interesting. I like. I'm more good at appreciating it than understanding how to make it. So I think I'm understanding why it's hard. Or harder than, people sometimes joke like you just put a rock in a museum and people will treat it like it's art, because sometimes it doesn't look like there's much thought into it, but it's not as simple as that.
Yeah, and it's there's one of the interviews I have linked to in the background information is an interview with Marcel Duchamp. He only made 13 Readymades in his entire lifetime. And one of the reasons is because of the very strict protocols that he established for creating a ready-made. Something that had absolutely no emotional attachment for him, so he could layer whatever context and meaning he wanted to onto it. And I suddenly then you realize it is difficult. It is hard. All the layers of thought that you have to contribute to this make it a difficult thing. And because, and I hope that people get that that's why conceptual art can be difficult, because you are literally sculpting with a person's imagination. You're sculpting with their worldview. And that can be very difficult because you have to consider all the different kinds of contextual ramifications that might be associated with something that you're working with. And I'm glad you mentioned wrapping, because wrapping, it is really important that the silhouette of the object be fundamentally changed somehow. And I've had people before to taken wooden toy silhouettes and wrapped it with a couple strips of ribbon or yarn saying that's good, when actually the wrapping, go back to what Jean-Claude and Christo did. If you're going to take a wooden toy and wrap it in something to get this to work, when you're done, it should look like something that Judith Scott made. It should look like a literal cocoon. And we've had several good examples where people have taken a collection of toys that represent their own memories or what their children mean to them, or something else like that, or ideas of innocence, and then wrap them together. And when they're all done, it looks like a spider's egg sac. It's completely transformed. And that's the level of work that we're looking at for the cocooning. It should look like a literal cocoon. So yeah, keep working. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And there are some people that did some good work that doesn't quite fit with the context of the assignment, and I've asked them, please reach out to me. I'm happy to talk this through with you so that it makes more sense. And also look on the discussion, look at other examples that we talked about in class, and refer to our discussions that we have had here in class, so that hopefully that will give you a greater insight into the parameters of the lesson. But next week, we're going to go a little bit deeper into some of this stuff, talk more about the final project per se, and we'll have more of these final critiques as well that people have done. And as you're doing the final assignment, doing the final color and texture assignment to your foam sculpture that you have carved, you sanded down, you've applied paper mache to, a big part of that is also going to be responses to 3 other people's work. So make sure you get that turned in as soon as you can, so you can apply those responses to other people's work as well. But thank you very much for coming tonight, Emily. I appreciate you being here.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to everybody who's watching this. If you do have questions, please let me know. Again, I'm going to link to in the attendance, you're going to have the recording of this, as well as links directly to the examples of artistic critiques that we presented tonight. So you can watch those again and again to your heart's content with whatever movie-going snacks you prefer. So, but thanks, Emily. Do you have any last observations or questions before we tie it up?
I don't think so, but if I think of any, I will be texting you.
All right, great. But I look forward to next week with everybody, and I look forward to seeing the stuff that you guys come up with. You guys have done some really amazing work this semester, and you should be very proud of yourselves. So, all right. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight, and I look forward to visiting with you guys next week.
Thanks. Have a good week.
You too.